Thank you very much for joining me in this video. I want to talk to you today about opinion of value and appraisal, what they are and how they differ. First of all, we need to understand market value. Market value is defined as what a willing buyer will pay to a willing seller for a property that's been exposed in the market for a reasonable amount of time and neither one of them is acting under undue pressure. So how do we know what market value is? We don't. We won't know until the property sells. So an appraisal is an educated guess. That's what it is, a guess. So is an opinion of value. Both of them are opinions of value. If you go way back to your licensing or to your licensing for real estate, taking the course, you remember they told you that everybody's an appraiser. You go and take a listing and the seller has a different opinion of value than you have. And then his neighbor has a different opinion again of the value of the property. They're all appraisers. They're all providing an opinion of the value of the property. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're credible, but neither are appraisers necessarily. We think of designations like AACI or CRA, and that indicates how much training they've got, and therefore the degree of sophistication they should bring to the table. But you don't have to be a CRA or an AACI to render an appraisal. When I started my real estate career, I did it in a little town called Hawkesbury, a town of 10,000, and there wasn't a local appraiser that had a designation. But in our office, there was a gentleman who wasn't tremendously involved in selling real estate, but he liked doing appraisals, and the bank accepted his appraisal, and yet he did not have a designation. But he did the appraisals and provided it for the banks. And as you know, if you've an experienced realtor, you've got a pretty good idea what properties are worth. If it's a semi-detached on Stanmary that's a reasonable condition, you can walk through it and you know what it's worth. And in fact, a lot of appraisers call realtors to find out what the price is anyway. So I want to talk to you about the difference between an actual appraisal and an opinion of value. When we think of an appraisal, we think about comps, a little bit like a CMA. We think about going back and taking a look at comparable properties that have sold in the similar area in a reasonably close period of time. And then you make adjustments for the differences between one property and another. And along with that, or unless you do the cost approach, and then you document your steps. You document the properties you've used, the adjustments you've made, and so on, and you lay it all out in an appraisal. When we think of an opinion of value, we think of just that. It's my opinion of the value. But it doesn't give you the right to bypass the research aspect. Sometimes we think we put a blindfold on, we've got a dartboard here, we throw a dart in the dartboard, and that's how we come up with the price. Or we just kind of wing it. Maybe we take a look at board stats and a couple of sales, but we come up with an opinion of value, and that's why we charge less for that for appraisal. I want to make sure you understand that that isn't the case. An opinion of value needs to have the documentation and it needs to be kept so you can refer to it to justify how you came up with your price. The difference really is the presentation. If I'm doing a letter of opinion, it's probably going to be one page. It's going to state the effective time, that I have no interest in the property, I've inspected the property, and this is my opinion of what it's worth. And if I do an appraisal, I'm going to provide all my comps, all my documentation, all my steps I went through. So in the one case, I have them in a file. In another case, I include them in the report. But in both cases, I need to be able to demonstrate the steps I went through. In fact, we've got a salesperson telling me recently that they've been subpoenaed to go to court as a witness. There was a husband-wife splitting up, and this particular person agreed to do a letter of opinion of value, and they did that. They did a letter of opinion, and they gave it to the parties, and now the one's challenging the value that the other one's relying on, and so they're calling him as a witness, and what they're going to require him to do is walk through the steps as to how he came up with that price. It was his opinion, but what's it based on? So it requires you to do the steps, do your homework, and that's very important to understand. One last thing I want to point out to you, whether it's an opinion value or whether it's appraisal, whatever you call it, and however the format is that you present it, I want to make sure that you're covered in case there's a problem that crops up and you end up actually being sued because of the figure you came out. Our errors and omission insurance will cover you doing a letter of opinion or an appraisal unless two things happen. One, they will not cover you if it's done for financing purposes. And so when you do an opinion of value or an appraisal, you need to put right in the bottom of this is not to be used for financing purposes. We had a situation once where the salesperson did an appraisal. The person was a past client of his, wanted to come up with a letter of opinion, the value of the property, and he did that. And it turned out that there was a particular stigma on this property he was not aware of that radically affected the value of the property. Well, the person who ended up with that opinion of value in his hands was a private lender, and he lent money so that somebody bought that property relying on that letter of opinion, and the person reneged on their payments, and the person who lent the money ended up taking the property back, and he found that it wasn't worth what he'd lent the money on, and we came to errors and omission, and we really were put on the spot to prove that he didn't know that it was for financing purposes. So if you're doing a letter of opinion, take the proactive step and put right in the letter not to be used for financing purposes. The other thing is that if you do a lot of them, like that fella in my office way back in Hawkesbury, they're not going to cover you for errors and omission either. In either case, financing purposes or you do a lot of them, you need to get a rider on your insurance or a special insurance to cover you for appraisals and letters of value, opinion of value. Hope that makes sense. I want to thank you for investing your time. Look forward to talking to you again next week.